Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Kasterborous. My name is Christian Cawley. I'm joined by James McLean this week, and we're kind of circling back around to last week's conversation about the missing episodes, the 2 episodes from the Daleks Master Plan that were recovered thanks to a donation from a collector's family to film Is Fabulous. Now, last week I chatted with Gareth Kavanagh. We had a great chat. We also had a great chat off air, which I can't share with any of you. If any of it comes to mind, I might share with James later on. We'll see. We were very enthusiastic and very excited about it, and it's great news. But there is this kind of, and obviously we don't want to get into a negative vibe with this, but there is the whole element of these episodes, they've been around for a long time. Someone's had hold of them and hasn't shared them. And that's not, I mean, that has kind of that makes feelings, doesn't it? It raises questions about why and how and what do they hope to gain out of it, maybe.
Yeah, I think it also makes you think, obviously the different types of collectors, and we've said this before. Is it someone who's collecting and holding things as assets to market and sell if they need to? In that case, in a capitalistic world, is that okay? I think it's almost in a weird way worse if it's someone who actually really does care and they never have any intention of selling it, but they have no intention of anyone else having it. That, I think, is almost worse than someone actually sort of seeing it as not something special, but just a commodity of a financial asset which they can mobilize at some point in a private market. That seems actually more moral in a weird way than actually holding it because you like it, but you don't want anyone else to have it. And I suppose it depends on what those people like, and we don't know. But yeah, it's an annoying thing. And we said this in a message, didn't we? That we talk about it's being found, and it's like it hasn't been found. It was kind of always there, just not accessible. Yeah, and that's. The missing episodes thing. I mean, going back. I mean, it goes back further. But if we go back to say Tomb of the Cybermen, they were found in Hong Kong. The episodes, not the Cybermen. So they were lost. They were missing. No one knew where those were. They were just on a shelf. Whereas with this, someone's had these for some time, and we've all heard stories. I think we've all heard, and James and I certainly have, and many other people have, and maybe something that maybe younger fans or newer fans have got to aren't aware of. But there was a trade in these things, wasn't there? And it was always spoken of in hushed tones at conventions and things. Then there'd be people who would invite, and Gareth mentioned this last week, I'm not sure if it went on air or not, of people who would hold screenings for these tapes, on the hush-hush, on the down low, as the common parlance is, I think. So these things have always been out there in circulation, but beyond the BBC's reach. It's a mindset I don't get. I think that's the problem. I'm always very cautious of, if you don't walk in someone else's shoes, can you be, would I be any different if I was in their situation? I don't know, but it just seems a really alien mindset to me. And I suppose alien because my subjective judgment is, it's pretty pathetic, really. So you can have private screenings like you're some sort of important people or God. Do you think, really? Do you think, history's not going to care about your private screenings. No one else is going to really care, And I think it's one of those things in the world which always blows me away, where people have, and I must admit I don't, this notion and importance of having some sort of historic legacy in the world, that somehow that they haven't, so many times used in fiction, the immortality that comes from something that occurs, that puts you in the history books, which means you're not forgotten. And it amazes me how in the world, especially it is today, when there is so many options and opportunities for people with power of all different kinds of level, of different stratas, to do stuff that would actually put them in the history books forever. Now, it could be small history books like the history of television or the history of a country or whatever, or history of a social problem. And people don't do it. And yet there seems to be still this thing that, we still want to be historically remembered. And yet so infrequently do we see that being done in a very positive way. And you think, being the person to have actually delivered material back, historic material, once again at a point where they clearly realise that there's historic significance to it, unlike the BBC when they got rid of the stuff. And you're not delivering it back. You don't want to be part of that historic conversation. I find that surprising as well, because you think you would.
Yeah.
You think you would as a Doctor Who fan, in terms of the history of Doctor Who, you'd want to have a positive landmark that speaks to your.
I mean, I agree with that. I can appreciate that. And I think, however, there might be, events of the past 15 years in the world of missing episodes might have maybe, if anyone was maybe prone or persuaded in any sense to maybe hand them back, maybe the treatment of other people who have handed episodes back might have given them cause for, second thoughts or whatever.
So you're feeling like, so what you're saying there is that they might be worried on a personal level that if they were identified as someone who'd actually.
Well, yeah, there's that, and that isn't what I was saying, but that is a good strong point. But I think Philip Morris, I think it was a chap who did a lot of work in finding Doctor Who episodes. I don't want to get this wrong, and I also don't want to say anything unnecessary, but he perhaps found that this was a very important thing that he was doing, and I think he probably expected more appreciation than what he got. And he got a bit of vilification for it, and unfairly, I think. Maybe people see that's how the reaction is, and they think, well, actually, no, I think I will actually keep hold of him. But coming back to your point about history, I mean, the thing about history is it is very. We're in a position in the UK recently where the government has decided that there's going to be no more hereditary peers, and I liked the mix that we had, because I think there's a case for people who have had a hand in the country over many years, maybe still having that option to do that, rather than everyone being dropped in there by the government. I mean, we're not even in a state where the second house is elected, as it were, which would be the better option of all of them. There's the opportunity for cronyism and things like that. But if you think about it, I mean, that's just a small nugget of what I'm getting at, which is that, as soon as there's an ice age, everything's over. There is no history after an ice age. Okay, there's only before the ice age where you don't have anything, and then there's the new history that starts. Loads of stuff happened before the last ice age. We don't know anything about it in the Northern Hemisphere, apart from a few frozen mammoths and the shape of everything changing. Most of it's completely gone. History is just what we make of it. Ultimately, it's almost a media of its own. And the famous saying about history is that it's written by the victors. So it is really just, history's a big thing, and it's maybe too big for us to maybe worry about. And maybe I'm just saying that because I'm not going to play any part in history. Maybe that's what it is.
My point is, and I totally agree with you, that's why I have no interest in having a legacy in history, because invariably people who do have a legacy in history, the legacy does not reflect who they are. It's a caricature or a superficial identity of who they were. It's not them. You'll never be remembered.
No, exactly, yeah.
In the way that you are. You'll just be remembered. It's the same I find with funerals. I find very deeply uncomfortable, is because we remember people in funerals for the good things, which I understand and I totally get, but in a weird way that sort of erases the personality of a person who is not perfect. There are things, and I like funerals where people can actually sort of say, actually, he did this and this, but sometimes he could be a real pain in the butt. I think that's more shaping.
Yeah.
So my point being, like you're saying, history is it's a society thing. It's subjective to perception and positioning and shaping and curating, but people still want it. No offense to him, but Ian Levine has kind of lived off his moments with finding the Daleks in the skip. In the skip. That has been his legacy, and I get the impression he's very proud of that, and that's fine, because he loves that show, and that has one of his, not his only, but one of his main contributions to it. So people, especially fans, are very keen about having their sort of imprint on something that's important to them. So I suppose in that sense, if you are a fan, and to the point, as you were saying earlier, that you're going to the conventions and having these secret clandestine things that give you maybe a feeling of importance within very small circles, you're probably someone who wants that history level. But then, like we also said, maybe there are other concerns. Maybe if you are that sort of person, you are very worried about then going to another convention and what people might think of you or say about you, or whether, in some instances, there could be, a Doctor Who aggravated assault, if you get someone very angry and drunk about, the fan, because fandoms are very passionate.
DWAR.
That was, a serious DWAR offence. I'm sure the Met has that on their books.
Undoubtedly.
Sometimes the London Comic Con event period. But yeah.
You mentioned Ian Levine, and
we joke about that, but there was in Norwich that time where the Star Wars and Star Trek fans at one of those very small conventions there had a big ruckus.
Really?
An ongoing one, yeah, and they didn't do it in that same space.
So what was it? Phasers and blasters at 20 paces, or what?
I'm not sure. I mean, if they were smart, one would be using transporters to try and disrupt molecules, and the other would be using Jedi powers to change minds. They wouldn't be going with lightsabers and phasers. That would be a very low-key approach to actually battle.
You're right. It'd be Jedi mind tricks to persuade them that they're...
If they were good fans, that's what they'd be after. But if they were casual fans, they'd probably be going for the lightsabers and phasers.
Yeah, of course.
No, you're absolutely right. They?
Yeah.
But no, the point. But yeah, I can't remember what the point you were about to make.
Well, I was going to say about Ian Levine, because you're right. He does have this big Doctor Who thing, and he spent a lot of money restoring missing episodes and stuff with animation stuff. But the thing is, Doctor Who's not his biggest thing. It's not his... I mean, we're talking about like history and footprints and stuff. He actually has a massive cultural footprint beyond Doctor Who that's far bigger than Doctor Who, with Northern Soul and disco music and high energy. So it absolutely baffles me that he put so much effort into it, into the Doctor Who thing. I'm not going to sit here in judgment or anything, but his social media comments are interesting, shall we say. And
they're passionate.
They're passionate, yes, exactly, yeah. Anyway, we should probably move on. Film is Fabulous are behind the handing over of the episodes to the BBC. The missing episodes were handed to them from a collector's family. I think the collector passed away, which is usually how Film is Fabulous gets their donations. And when I say their donations, I mean the film that they are given to restore. And it is a huge project. And we mentioned this last week. This is a very important archival project that's ongoing. So if you're able to donate to Film is Fabulous, track them down and donate. I'm talking money, not tins of old film, because it is a charitable trust. Film is Fabulous has released a few details about this, because usually when the BBC gets missing episodes, we kind of don't hear much about it beyond these have been found and this is when you're going to get them. What Film is Fabulous has been publishing certainly on Facebook and on X/Twitter, publishing some updates about it, and which is really interesting. They've been showing some restoration stills, Doctor Who restoration by R3 Store. Film is Fabulous have collaborated with the BBC Archives and R3 Store's studios in London to ensure that the 2 recovered episodes of Doctor Who look and sound great when released on BBC iPlayer. There is a lot of restoration work going into this, which makes me wonder how long this has actually been going on. It would seem that it certainly predates the announcement by some months.
Must have, yeah.
Now, there is a comment here. Someone's noticed, I noticed the restored version is cropped compared to the unrestored, more so at the sides. Is this crop representative of the stored masters or just this post? I generally like to see as much of the available picture area as possible. It does seem that there is a slight crop in there in what was shared there. That is a thing that does tend to happen with these things, isn't it? Where I think one of the big examples of this is, I know it's happened in Dot 2, but I think one of the more famous examples is with the Thunderbirds, when they were repackaged about 20 years ago. There was a lot of cropping in those, although the whole Thunderbirds thing is very confusing, so I may have got the dates wrong there. But I know there's been a lot of cropping on Thunderbirds, and they've been restored and switched around, and shots have been switched over the years. So it is something that it's not a hugely important thing, but I mean it does reduce the authenticity of what you're watching. But at the same time, does it affect the authenticity of what you're watching? Because you're not going to be watching it on a black and white TV in 1964, are you? The Daleks Master Plan. Was it 64, 65? 65. You're not going to be watching it. No, absolutely. Surely no one is watching the Daleks Master Plan re-release on BBC iPlayer via a 70-year-old CRT, are they?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's the sort of thing you do.
Me?
Well, but you like your nostalgia. You've got your video game stuff.
Do you know? I just slight side step here. Many years ago, Anthony Dry, the illustrator, gave me his copy of Return of the Saint on DVD. I was like, oh, I've never watched this. So we sat watching it with Kerry, and we were enjoying it. It was quite good. I mean, a typical ITC sort of a show. And midway through maybe the second or third episode, I was like, I've seen this before. The reason I didn't recognise it because it's in beautiful full colour. But my gran had a black and white TV until about, I want to say 1992, maybe 1990. And I'd watched it on a Sunday afternoon as a kid growing up. But I didn't recognise it because we were around my grandma's on a Sunday afternoon and everything, the world was in black and white at grandma's house. So it does change things, doesn't it? It does change how we look at things. And we look at Dinosaur Invasion of the Dinosaurs on Doctor Who. And, you know, that black and white only episode, those dinosaurs look great. And then when it gets colorized, those dinosaurs look like puppets. So it all has an impact on how we perceive what we're viewing and how we enjoy it and whether we enjoy it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a good case for people just to calm down, because you're right. I mean, if you want the true experience or the authentic experience, or seeing, you know, as you say, one of these episodes as it was meant to be shown, you would see it, you'd have to watch it on a very small set in black and white, with maybe, you know, quite a poor transmission depending on your aerial.
One speaker, just mono audio.
Yeah, but people don't want that. They want everything about it, in a sense that gives them the experience of what it was. And it's not, what you're asking is actually something very different to what it was. But it's a weird sort of clash of authenticity and, I suppose, I don't know, like an immediacy to it, where you're really in there, and you do, I don't know, immediacy is the wrong word for it. I've never quite got it, to be honest. I think because I always grew up in a house which was, you know, we weren't poor, but we didn't have the best stuff. You know, our video player eventually had a watch strap hanging out the eject button that was attached to, well, it was a watch with one strap missing.
Okay.
And the strap had got, I don't know how I'd done it. It was me who'd done it. As it happened, the button to the video player had fallen in.
Right.
Which could happen sometimes. The mold button fallen into the casing.
Yeah.
And somehow I'd got a watch strap to curl inwards into there to create enough pressure on the sensor, I think, to make the ejection come out. You know, that was sort of level that and it worked every time. And only I could do it. I knew how to pressure on this watch strap to make the eject system work. So my point being is that kind of used to everything being sort of kind of a little low grade. And some people, when they had that, I think they turned into people who go like, now, once I've got money or something, I need to see everything as I really, truly wanted.
Yeah.
While there's other people who go, well, this is kind of like the level I'm used to. I'm cool with it. It's all right. And so I've never had that sort of like, where's the ball? You know, what's happened to a little bit of the trim? Where's it gone? You know, why is this not in a proper surround sound, whatever? I mean, it's that surround sound's going a few years back. But, you know, I've never had any of that. So I've never needed it. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like if you get to that point, it spoils it. My uncle had perfect pitch. And he used to get extremely frustrated because you'd have to have high-end equipment for everything, because if anything was slightly off, he'd find it very upsetting. And you'd go, well, he's got a beautifully trained ear. You know, he was in orchestras, but he had this, it was a bane of his life. You'd get out of the car, he'd be frustrated because the one car door would slam to a C and the other would slam to a C sharp. You know, sometimes it's kind of nice not to have that need to have everything perfect and need that sort of spec. So I do actually feel sorry for people who do, and I don't mean that in a sort of patronizing way. I genuinely feel quite sorry if you do feel that need, that you do need everything in such high quality that if it's not quite there, you know, you're frustrated. If, you know, if you're missing a slither of the, I don't know, I just like.
Yes. Film is Fabulous. I just want to rewind slightly a couple of months here. Film is Fabulous announced in February that they're in discussions with the families of two deceased former industry professionals about the acquisition of their collections and the preservation of the rare films. Then they showed a photo which I suspect is pretty generic. That indicates that there's a lot more to come from Film is Fabulous, and, you know, it probably won't be Doctor Who. There's a lot of missing stuff out there. Doctor Who is probably the most prominent of it, and then Dad's Army, which I think they've probably found as much Dad's Army as they're going to. So beyond that, we're probably looking maybe episodes of Coronation Street, maybe. So it'd be interesting to see what they actually have and whether they do turn out to be some of the more popular things, or whether they're just like rare information films or, you know, documentaries.
Were these technicians' copies that they?
This is what it said, industry professionals. Now, in terms of whether the copies that we got were technicians' copies, I think there is some indication that they have come from within the industry with these ones as well. So they could well have been technical copies in some sense, yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. We maybe talking about other things today, but, you know, you just talked about video recorders. And I think a couple of weeks ago, we talk about the radio rentals man having a missing arm?
You either dreamt that, or I wasn't listening, or I've forgotten. Actually, all three of those are quite likely
All at once.
for me. Yes.
Yeah. So I recall talking about a guy who used to come and repair our TV when I was a kid, and he had one hand. But the thing is, I could quite easily have been talking to one of my kids about this. So basically, there was a time when people rented TVs and videos, wasn't there? And you were talking about your old video recorder, and I was thinking we had video recorders, and then we didn't have video recorders because we were renting, and there were times when there was other priorities, so we didn't have them. And then at one point there was a situation where mum and dad could afford a video recorder and a TV and a computer, and so. But before those times, there was the rental age. So you'd basically get a video and then a video record, and then you pay for it weekly. I mean, in today's terms, it was pennies, and even by today's terms, you probably wouldn't have been paying very much for it anyway, I don't think. And it's kind of, I tried to explain this to my children the other day, that we had this time where we used to just rent all the electrical stuff, and they couldn't believe it. And it does seem like a very different sort of thing, but to anything nowadays, but going back to then, and then like looking back over, the previous 30, 40 years before that, it seems completely normal in that sort of era of the introduction of package holidays and just a few years before that, the existence still of rationing, that there should be a time where you rent your electrical goods.
It should be clear that we were born way off the period of rationing.
Yes.
You're compressing.
Yes, I am.
Time quite
Yes,
a lot
I am.
there.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, we say that, but there's a lot of evidence at the moment that renting a car on a long-term rent is actually a far more economically valuable thing to do.
Yeah.
And technically, owning a car is a prestige thing because they devalue so fast that there's no real financial benefit in owning a car.
Yeah.
So there are elements of rentals, and of course, we spend our lives at the moment renting video libraries.
Yes.
We are more captured in the rental market now than we ever have been.
Well, this is the interesting thing, because we seem to be more interested in renting things that we can't hold than things that we can hold.
Yeah, and I think some of that is because the things like for instance, Steam, I don't think people really ever think about, because they're paying for games, that in a sense they're still actually, the licensing doesn't mean they own the game.
No, it doesn't. Although
Steam
it does, but if you're using GOG, you do own the games.
So there's a difference there, but these models don't make you feel like you're renting.
No, they don't. No.
I suppose that's the thing. If you subscribe to Netflix, or Spotify, there is a rental subscription access. There's a crossover there.
Yeah.
But you're right in terms of, invariably, because practical technology has become so much cheaper, that the renting has become I think that's in part of it. But yeah. We used to rent as well. My family used to rent the TV too. It was a bigger thing, and maybe that will change again. It's all ups and downs.
Yeah.
I think, renting houses is expensive at the moment. In some ways, there are Europe. It's a more popular thing. Maybe that will shift. Will the subscription model start to shift? I think it might eventually. We've got a generation which is not so much into streaming culture, not so much into films. Once they come off their mum and dad's subscriptions, will they be so eager to run 5 subscriptions? Probably not.
No.
How is that going to shift? I know, I know young people who've got, massive, vinyl has obviously been a big thing over the last 10 years, but also now DVDs, and I'm even hearing of VHS. Young people, not all of them, because they're not all the same, but young people, early teens, early 20s, they want to hold things.
Yeah.
So while that doesn't mean that they're going to start going back to renting TVs and the like, I think it does mean that whole buying, renting framework could shift again. But yeah, you're right, it is odd. I mean, especially like with cars, where, as I say, the renting of a car is a long-term contract, not like renting for the weekend, is actually quite economically viable.
Yeah.
To have a good car and do that, but people don't do that, and that's an interesting thing. And yet that wasn't something you could do, as far as I remember, back in the 20th century. People didn't.
No, well, cars were relatively cheap, and people were very keen to borrow, like lend cars to you when I was growing up. If you needed a car, just borrow mine, which isn't something that tends to happen these days so much. outside of families anyway.
No. It's a weird thing, isn't it? Looking back at eras.
Listeners on Patreon now get the opportunity to listen to James and myself discussing Sapphire and Steel and, bizarrely enough, teletext. For everyone else, we're going to move on to a chat about Tom Georgeson and then the end of the show. Before we finish, we should probably have a little chat about Tom Georgeson, who's sadly passed away a few days ago. He was in tons of stuff. He was one of those people that I always felt was absolutely excellent in whatever he was in, regardless of everyone else or the production as a whole. He interestingly almost bookended Tom Baker's Doctor Who. He's in Genesis of the Daleks and Logopolis, playing a policeman in Logopolis. Played a lot of policemen, did Tom Georgeson. And he played Cavill in Genesis of the Daleks. So he's like a few episodes into Tom Baker's run. But, you know...
Was he the quintessential... Which one was he in Logopolis?
He's the policeman outside the TARDIS.
Okay, not the inspector who comes to arrest the Baker.
Yeah, that's him. Yeah.
Not tiny one. Tiny one who is...
No, not the tiny one. Anyway, he was in Between the Lines, of course, in the mid-90s, which was the quintessential sort of police corruption show until Line of Duty came along. He's done loads of stuff. I mean, he was in a movie with Paul McGann as well in 1997 called, I want to say the name of it, Downtime, because it had the same name as a Doctor Who fan production. And it was set in Newcastle. And Paul McGann played some sort of psychologist or psychiatrist or social worker. I can't quite recall. I've only watched it once. And there's a bit of getting trapped in an elevator in it. And Tom Georgeson was a Scouser. He was in the Famous Boys from the Black stuff. But in this, and he usually played a Cockney in a lot of stuff, particularly when he was playing a copper. But in this, he was playing a Geordie. He was very good at doing accents. So, but yeah, he was in just such a lot of stuff. He was in an episode of Ashes to Ashes as well. So he did a lot of stuff. So that's, he was 88 when he passed away. He'd done a lot of work. A solid actor, I think. Really good in everything.
Well, you're probably in a position now. I don't have anything to add, but okay. I feel it's disrespectful for me to say I don't have anything to add because this is a person's legacy.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of something to add. I don't know. I think it is funny how when you've seen something so long, like so many times like Logopolis, and all those components are very familiar to you, the rhythm, the characters on the screen and what they play in the show. And then sometimes you watch a show like that and you think, my God, at that time, that was a living, breathing space where all those people are alive, you know, and in that case, I'd be alive somewhere there as a very, very small child while that was being filmed. I existed in that space somewhere off camera. And there is something so historically fascinating, which I think is what partially wants some of the love for television that we have and film, that sort of retros. And, you know, I think nostalgia is sometimes a loaded term in terms of you think about it sort of like this, always a desire or a fond memory of the past. But I think just sometimes it's a fascination to access the past and just to reposition yourself and go, you know, this person here playing this part was a real human being who had a life before it and would have a life after it. Yeah. And we're just seeing like a snapshot moment in their life before they move on. And I think the thing when there's a passing is that suddenly that life has boundaries.
Yes.
And that's a weird thing. I think now I'm now seeing a part in someone's road or roadmap to a finish line. And that's and that sounds a bit crass as well. I don't mean it to be crass. And I don't mean it to seem distant, but I think there's something quite beautiful in that as well. So it's something that...
we've talked about Facebook usage changing over the years on a couple of occasions, and you know, it's not like, hey school friend, hey school friend, hey work friend, and now it's more of a kind of like, here's some interest groups, and you spend some time with the interest group and look at what people are discussing and stuff. And I've found myself increasingly looking at old photos of the town where I'm from and the town where my mum's from. Invariably, I will look at the date of the photo and then wonder, you know, where am I at this point? Where are my grandparents at this point? Yeah. You know, and, you know, could they just be about to wander into shot? Is that woman there my grandma? You know, the back of it, you know, wandering along with her handbag over her arm and stuff. It's strange. And I think that's a similar sort of thing. You know, when it comes to photos and when it comes to movies and TV shows, you are looking at a snapshot of someone's life within a square as well, like a photo or whatever, which is that kind of compressed, because that crystallizes it even further, I suppose, because, you know, something that's small and square is, and as you know, you can pick up a photo, you can pick up a DVD, so you can carry it around with you. You're carrying a moment of time around, or like this person, snapshot of this person's life or whomever. You can take it around with you and put it away, which is
an incredible thing that,
yeah.
you know, even within the last 100 years, you know, you're a civilization which could have this access to the past, which before would be, you know, apart from paintings or written, you couldn't have.
No.
There's a lovely bit of film from, I can't remember if it's the very early 20th, I think it's very early 20th century, of some kids, and I can't remember what town it's in. It's a British town. I think it's a mining town. And I think it's on YouTube, because I remember the comments going, God, they all look so, they're like they're trying to be grown-ups and adults, because they all look kind of their eyes and their faces. And it's like, yeah, because they would be going to work in the same place as the adults. They are mimicking the adult world that they live in. And it's this snapshot of not just a different time, but a different dynamic, social dynamic, which you, and I think that again is fascinating, these little pockets. And if we wanted to sort of take this back to the beginning of the podcast, it goes back to this whole thing of everything is ephemeral, you know, not just the existence of our culture, but also, you know, within our culture, we've said this before, you know, that you can store film in conditions to keep it, preserve it for as long as you want, but it's not going to last forever. It will go. Nothing lasts forever. And it's very weird to get these moments which will eventually disappear as we will disappear.
Yes.
You know, everything. And I find that kind of comforting in a way. I think it's like when you have a house full of stuff, you become very concerned and stressed about your house full of stuff. If you don't have a house full of stuff and it's just you, there's a lot less stress.
Yeah.
In a sense, knowing that eventually we just vanish. And there might be these pockets of moments, I mean, certainly for actors, where, you know, you have a little bit of a longer lasting, you know, imagery.
Yeah.
That's nice, but we all disappear eventually.
Yes.
And that should be a comfort, really. It's unifying.
It is.
And why do we want to be remembered? What benefit does it have? None. Such a silly thing. Just enjoy the moment. And which I know is hard at this moment, because you're here sitting for some reason listening to this, when you could be doing something which is actually tangibly enjoyable or meaningful. You've only got a certain amount of time here, mate, and frankly, you're wasting it listening to two people, probably a little too old to be doing this now, people talking about a show which probably should have died a long time ago. I mean, you know, it's got to the point where we just sort of talk about like how big cars are, or how good teletext was, or that I had a video where there was a watch strap hanging out of it. You know, this is the level of quality that you decided to listen to. And you think of all the hot quality podcasts out there that you could be listening to right now. There's some really good stuff. I was listening to a really interesting podcast before I came on to do this bit. You know, I'm looking forward to going back to listening to it when I can, rather than what I'm having to do at the moment, which is, you know, talk with Christian here and, you know, to some degree yourself. But just ask yourself that. Why are you listening to this? Why?
We'll see you next week. That's all from us. Bye-bye.